Welcome to the 3Haunted podcast, where we bring you all things horror, supernatural, folklore, mythology, and all things that go bump in the night.
What's up, everybody? This is your co host, Ashley Lunar Goddess, Gorilla Girl filmmaker and horror loving cinephile. I'm just your average podcast producing badass.
I'm John Thomas. Some would say that I go a little too far with my love of all things horror, paranormal, and meta, but I say, talk nerdy to me, and I'm all yours.
What's up, ghouls, gals, and all of our meta pals out there? In today's episode, we'll be discussing how trauma and emotions attract paranormal and supernatural activity. Joining us on this topic is transformational therapist and energy healer Marisa Grace. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. I've, poked around your website and have already so many questions. I'm a very curious person, you'll find.
That's good. So am I.
But yes, welcome to our podcast. We're very appreciative that you made space to come on and talk to us about your specialties.
Yes, thank you so much for, letting me come on and speak about, this topic that affects all of us in some way or another, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just jump right in, but I find it really interesting, this idea that trauma can actually directly impact paranormal and supernatural occurrences around us. So I was wondering, can you speak more to that? What does that mean?
Yeah, this is something that probably not most people are aware of, how their traumas can really attract, supernatural or paranormal activity in their lives. So how does that work? Well, what I find, and I'll speak a lot about my own personal experiences because, I don't mind sharing them, and I have lots of them. And reflect back on some of the experiences that I've had over the years that confirms a lot of the things that I've been kind of studying over the years also because I was curious to find out, certain things that were happening and why they were happening. So I suffered from a lot of trauma in my early years that left me severely depressed in my teens. So believe it or not, there's so many of us, that are just walking around with so much trauma we don't even realize it, or we just don't want to, talk about it or face it. But at some level, we all experience some type of trauma, whether it's, something very little or something very drastic with, sexual abuse, mental, physical abuse. I experienced all of them. And that left me very depressed. By the time I was a teenager, extremely depressed, became an introvert, very isolated because I didn't have the help, the assistance, and there was no support system to really help me process everything. And it took me many, many years to overcome that depression. I kind of had to fight through it. So with that, I had a lot of experiences that I couldn't explain. And, I started questioning it, like, why are these things happening? And what it turns out, once, there was a point in my life that I kind of put all the pieces together. So I'll go into more in detail of some of those experiences so we kind of understand. So there was a time I was, this was I was already in my adulthood. I was already married. And at this time, my husband had also got into depression due to an accident. So this is also a very common thing where when people experience like a traumatic event where there's an accident or severe pain, a lot of times they'll go into a deep depression. That's what happened with him. And I was still struggling with my depression at that time. And there's just certain things that were happening in our home that I couldn't explain. And you could kind of feel the environment in the home. It was, and this is probably very common as you interview a lot of people that experience paranormal. It kind of feels very dense, the space. Um, there, you kind of hear things and you're like, wait, was somebody in the home? I, you hear like noises or somebody's calling your name and you're like, wait, is my husband home? But there's nobody there. I was like, what was that? I never witnessed anything other than feelings, through these experiences. I would feel something or I would hear something like somebody would call my name, or I would hear like my child called me, but I'm like, but she's not here. Like, who's calling me? Um, and
See,
there was
that would be
one
unnerving to me.
specific event that really got me super scared. And I was laying in bed, going to sleep, and I literally woke up and felt like somebody was suffocating me with their hands, and there was nobody there. And I was trying to scream, and nothing was coming out. My voice wasn't working. I'm like, I need help. Like, I can't breathe. Like, what is this? What is this force? And I couldn't explain it, what I was experiencing. I couldn't explain all these things that were happening. And luckily, I think my mother is a little bit more open, where she has experienced these same things, but she's kind of able to see. There are times she's able to see whether it's a ghost or a spirit, or she will see energy, whatever color. And there was one time she came over my house and she's like, there's this big dark cloud, hovering over your home. And I'm like super worried. And I'm like, what cloud? I don't see anything. Like, everything is normal. Like, what are you talking about? Um, that got me curious. I'm like, what are these things that we're experiencing? But it wasn't until at a certain point in my life where it kind of started my healing journey that I started realizing that I was directly, affected by my depression and also my husband. We're both creating this negative space and this negative energy within our home because of where we were emotionally. When we experience certain emotions, especially when it comes to depression, severe anxiety, anger, um, we all experience this heaviness because those emotions are heavy. So just saying, depression, it feels heavy, even the word. And if anybody, has experienced depression or severe sadness, and I'm sure we all had moments where you had a bad day, you're sad, you feel that heaviness. That heaviness is the energy, the output that we're putting out from that emotion. So it wasn't when I started learning about the energies and the association with our emotions that I realized that, okay, now that makes sense because of all the emotions that we're experiencing, and most of them were all negative. It made sense that our environment felt heavy and I was experiencing all these things. So I started paying very close attention, to these experiences. And I'll share a very interesting experience that I had that it was my proof that this was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one time I decided, okay, I had enough of this, of what was going on. And I started noticing the effects, of the energy that it was impacting our lives. And I said, enough is enough. Like, I had enough. Like, this is time to change. So one of the things that we can do to clear the spaces is use sage, or there's some palo, and there are other things, holy water. I had tried the holy water. I had tried like a religious way of going about it, and nothing was working. But I was very determined to turn this situation around. And I wanted to also prove myself this is what it was. There was negative energy in this space. So I said, okay, I'm going to cleanse. I had determined this is what I was going to do, cleanse the space. So the day I had planned to do so, I go and run some errands, went to pick up my daughter, literally parked the car, went inside the building to pick up my daughter. It took like 2 minutes, came back, my car wouldn't start. And I'm like, well, I know I, turn off the car. I Even though I was rushing, I'm like, very interesting. Like nothing was coming out, no lights. So I'm like, oh, I wonder what it is. Maybe it's my fob from the key.
Mhm.
Because I noticed before when the battery goes out, like nothing goes on, like no lights. So I said, okay, we'll walk to the auto store, we'll get a new battery, we'll try to turn on the car. I get to the auto store, and the clerk that was there was trying to help me. He opened the key fob. He's like, this is interesting, but I can't get your battery out. I think you have to go to the dealer. I'm like, okay. I'm like, should be simple. Should all be able to open the fob, take out the battery. So I'm like, okay. So call my mom. I'm like, can you come and help me, bring me home? I have an extra set of keys, so I'll try that and see if it works, if I can get my car started. She drives down, picks me up. I go home, get the other key, come back, nothing. But while I went home, I was kind of like puzzled by what I saw. Like he tried to open the key. I'm like, I don't understand why he couldn't get the battery out. Like I shouldn't have to go to the dealer. I opened the key fob and it looked totally different. And I was able to take the battery out. I'm like, this is very strange. Like the
Oh,
guy
how
was there,
odd.
like struggling with the key and couldn't open it. And we literally could not take the battery out. I'm like, all right, we'll go back, try the other key, nothing. So I figured, okay, both batteries must be dead. So let me go to another auto store. So we drove to the other auto store. They didn't have the batteries available. They were sold out.
Oh,
And
no.
it turns out it was a very common battery, that most cars use. I'm like, okay, interesting. So we'll go to another store. We went to another store. By this time, I was kind of questioning what was happening. I'm like, all these little things kind of don't make sense. And I said to myself, I said, okay, whatever's going on over here, I kind of had enough. And, if they don't have batteries, I don't care. I'm going to drive to every water store that I know until I find them.
I love the determination.
Yes. But I was determined, I was going to do something and nothing was going to stop me. I go to the third store. They had batteries. So I'm like, okay, good. Change the batteries, go back. Nothing. I'm like, all right, so it's not the batteries. So I decided I got to call a tow truck. So I knew my insurance, I had tow coverage. They would pay for the tow truck to come. I call. It turns out the coverage was under my husband's car. I said, that doesn't make any sense. He has an older car. I have the newer
Yeah.
car. I know I added the coverage to my car. But I said, it doesn't matter. Just get me a tow truck. So sure enough, like I'll get somebody, somebody will be right there and, we'll get it towed to a shop nearby and figure out what's going on. About half an hour later, she calls me back, the lady. She's like, I'm sorry, they just called. They had to cancel because they had an emergency and they can't come. So we're going to have to get another company. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Just get me somebody. And so she said, okay, I got somebody, but they're kind of busy. They can't get there until the next day. I said, that's fine. As long as I get a tow truck to, bring my car to a shop, I can't turn it on. So the next day I sent my husband, I said, just wait there until the tow truck arrives. So the tow truck was supposed to be there early in the morning. He goes, it was an hour later than the time he was supposed to show up. Still not there. So I get a message from the tow truck company. He's like, I'm sorry. Got into a fight with my wife and we have to go to church. So I won't be there for another hour. I'm like, okay, no problem. We waited the hour or two, get another message. I'm sorry, something else happened. We got delayed. And I'm like, oh my God, this can't get any worse. I'm like, what is going on? Finally, I realized, I start piecing everything together. I'm like, okay, I made a decision that I was going to clear the space I'm like, I bet you it has everything to do with this, that whatever it's here does not want to leave, and therefore is trying to stop me from doing something that's going to
To
make it
clear
go
it.
away.
Oh my gosh.
And I literally just kind of spoke out loud and I said, whatever you're trying to do, it's not going to work because I'm very determined and I'm going to do what I was going to set out to do. So I don't care how long you're going to take or whatever you're going to do, I'm still going to do it. And I went ahead and just did it. I kid you not, 20 minutes later, that tow truck showed up. And not only did he showed up, it was my battery in my car that was totally drained. He started off the car was fine, and everything was good. And I turned to my husband, I'm like, this does not make any sense. Like, I had a brand new battery in the car. There's no sign there was something wrong with the battery. I knew when I parked the car, I didn't leave any doors open. I literally took 2 minutes to go inside the building, get my daughter, and come back out. So there wasn't even enough time, even if I did leave like a door open or I didn't turn the car off, to drain the battery. So it's unexplainable. Plus, it didn't explain the fact that the clerk couldn't get the battery out of my key fob, and it looked totally different than when I opened it at home. And then I realized, oh my God, this energy, whatever that we created, has also a consciousness because it's so comfortable living in that space. And it was kind of feeding off that energy that now that I had decided it was time to leave, it didn't want to go away. So it was kind of like playing around of with interfering with certain things. And I've seen this over and over again. And I've seen it even with clients, especially if they're very depressed and they'll come on a call. And if it's like their first session or whatever, the phone starts ringing and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I get interrupted. My phone never rings. And now, it's somebody's calling I don't even know. And it's like some neighbor that never calls them. Or the dog starts barking. There's always like an interference. So whenever I also see that those individuals will try to make a step to either get better, which means that the energy now has to leave because it doesn't have that frequency, that negative frequency anymore to live off of. They will try to interfere to stay in the space. So that's kind of like some of the things that I have experienced and witnessed over and over again over time that has confirmed that our emotional state absolutely will create. Not only does it create, it attracts more into that space. It's like it creates a magnet.
So, for those people that are in that emotional state, whether it be from trauma that they experienced in the past or current, um, you know, depressive states, if they're drawing that in, stuff like saging and holy water and stuff like that, will that only then temporarily cleanse it because they kind of need to change that vibration as well?
That is correct. It's only temporary. So that will clear the space. That doesn't last long. And then what happens is you're constantly doing it. So, how do you really get rid of it? Is really by healing yourself. You have to get out of that negative frequency. And the only way to get out of the negative frequency that attracts that negative energy into your space is really by overcoming whatever it is that you're struggling with. So whether it's, depression, PTSD, severe anxiety, sadness, you have to work on those things to elevate your frequency to a more positive, more joyful frequency where those negative entities, or I kind of, I see them more like bugs, just like you get a virus on your computer, or the way I, try to describe them is, when you go to a website and then you get all these Trojans and all these pop-ups and you're like, oh my God, why did I come to this website? that's basically what it's like. You start attracting all this stuff. So what do? You have to go to a website, a web page that's, more clear, it's been verified, and it's in a good state, that's not has all these attachments to it, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of like that. So you don't want you want to work on yourself to elevate, the state of mind that you're in, so that you start operating from a more positive frequency where those things are not attracted. They can, even though you may still experience some of that, they don't stay there very long, because that's not their frequency, and they can't live off of a higher frequency.
Now, is this where the MARTP comes into play, like when people come to you?
Yeah, so I am a clinical hypnotherapist, and I use that tool. That's one of the things that I do to kind of, help them just get to the root cause and find out where, their trauma is coming from. Why are they severely depressed? Why are they having all these emotions? And we try to, work through them so they could heal those parts and elevate, the energy. The other thing I do is energy healing. And I discovered this by accident. As I was going through the process of discovering my gifts and, trying to figure it out, how am I helping people and how is this working? And I still, trying to learn more and more. Um, so there was a day where uh, my brother was going through a really rough time in his life. And there was a day where I never, ever in my life experienced sciatic pain. And I woke up and I couldn't move my leg. My leg was, it was like the sciatic nerve was like so tight. I couldn't bend my leg. I was kind of paralyzed. And I'm like, okay, I can't go to work. And I couldn't explain why I was having this experience. And, I just felt, okay, maybe I should just meditate. And went into meditation, and I started, I do work a lot with white light energy, which is the energy of source, through my healing practices. And I started, channeling the white light energy and started sending it to my brother for no reason. I didn't understand, why I was doing it, but I just did it. And I came to find out later on that he was at such a low point that day that he was suicidal. And that saved his life. So I came to, through experiences of doing that energy transfer, what I've come to notice is when I do those, it does help the individual kind of shift from frequencies. Now, they don't permanently stay at a higher frequency, but it's enough of a shift that they could then make a better choice.
Yeah, it's a moment of reprieve.
Yes. So I've seen that with other individuals where um, there was a friend, and he was, um, with drugs in a very bad place, wasn't working. And I did that with work for a while, and within about a month, he finally got a job, went back to work. That doesn't mean it didn't change, his addiction or anything, but it shifted him enough where he then started taking steps to a new direction. So it depends. It's enough where you can shift from maybe one frequency to another so that you can make a better choice than what you're making right now.
I think too of like when we get injured or we're in pain, sometimes, for example, if we have injury and we're trying to rehabilitate the muscle, sometimes we need help like a wrap or a compression, sleeve to help us as we build that back up. And so when someone is in that state of, overwhelmed or feeling like they're drowning or drained, even that moment of uplift is enough to kind of start retraining themselves to take that moment of breath and retrain for that kind of I don't want to say higher vibration, because it might just be more towards the homeostasis of like a balanced vibration. So that's awesome. You're amazing to do that, and you're able to do that. When did you first start learning how to do all of these things? What, like, channel, or I don't want to say channeling the white light, but getting connected to source?
So I started, it just came on. It wasn't like, I want to say it was just kind of an awareness of, let me try this without knowing. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't like anybody showed up and told me, do this. It was just like all of a sudden, I'm like, let me try this. So it was like, I guess, a knowing already of, let's play with this. And I started playing with it with actually my dad. So my dad, my whole childhood, he was an alcoholic, narcissistic individual, has a very rough voice, and, always very demeaning, always yelling, always, in a very negative space. So I started playing with it with him to see, I'm like, let me see what happens. So he would come home. There was a time period where I moved in with my parents because I wanted to help them shift, from the place where they were at, which was still very kind of chaotic. And I wanted my mother to be able to shift out of that and realize that she shouldn't, put up still with that type of abuse. And the only way for me to do that was to move in and show her. So he would come home, and first thing he would start was yelling at my mother, this and that. And I would notice that. So I would go into meditation and start using the energy and sending it to him. And what I would notice is, as soon as I would do that, he would walk out the door, come back in, and he would be in a totally different mood. So he was no longer, coming in yelling and screaming and being very negative. He was like a calm, normal person. And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. And I did that over and over again because I didn't know. I'm like, is this really working? Is this like really me? Is this, maybe I'm like, making all this stuff up. This isn't real. And I started doing it over and over. Like, I want to know if this is real. Is this really working? Because I can't see the energy. I could feel the shift. So that's how it all started. And I noticed the differences. So whenever there was like chaos, or somebody was in a bad mood, I'm like, okay, let me try to go into meditation and do this and see what happens. And I would notice instantaneously the change in mood and people's perspectives. So they would instantaneously shift from like a very negative state of being to a more positive. So it wasn't as chaotic. And I was like, oh, I wonder if does this work like long distance? Like they're right there. And that was the instance with my brother. And I'm like, oh my goodness, maybe, this could make an impact on people's lives, even if it's just for a short period of time. Maybe it's just enough where they can have a shift for them to make more positive choices, even if it's like to make a decision to go to a doctor or to actually make that phone call to get the help that they need. Because a lot of times, individuals, when they're so down in that depressive mood, they just can't even get themselves to make that phone call. Procrastination, self-sabotage comes into play. And I've experienced that even with clients. You got to do your follow-up call. And then they'll keep postponing and postponing the call. But, there's a million excuses, and that's what happens, the self-sabotage. And sometimes I'll even do it with clients. I'm like, okay, when I start seeing the pattern, I will do that. And then instantaneously they'll book the call and show up. So I, I know it's doing, a positive thing, and it's affecting them in a positive way to make that shift.
That's really amazing that that gift, the energy healing and sending light, connecting to source light came intuitively to you. And the fact that you were practicing it without even realizing it to strengthen it because you're like, well, let me test and see if this is really working, like if that's actually what's happening. So you were testing, is this real? And by doing that, you strengthened it because you're using it more and more and more and developing that gift. So that's really awesome. Now, how did the rest of those techniques that you use come about, like the hypnosis and hypnotherapy, and what's EFT tapping? That was a lot of questions in one.
Of course. So, well, I'll start with the EFT tapping. So, it's a very great technique, and it's been used by a lot of therapists to help individuals, especially with PTSD. So, it's widely used with those individuals, but anyone can use this. They're so simple. So, it's similar if everybody's familiar with acupuncture. So, acupuncture uses needles. The tapping is basically what it is. It's using your fingers to tap on those meridian points in your body
Okay.
to help you come out of certain situations. So let's say, and you could use it for anything. So let's say today you're having a bad day or you're struggling, let's say, to study for a test, or, you have a fear that you might fail a test, for example. I'm just going to use that as an example. What you do is you just use your fingers and you just tap on certain points and you repeat a phrase. And what that does is by tapping in those meridian points and you say these phrases, which are very simple, you want to simulate positive input while tapping into those points. What your body does, it sends out signals. Your neurons start shooting throughout your body and telling your body, okay, everything is okay. You no longer need to be in that fight or flight mode. And it starts receiving those messages. So it allows your body to kind of calm down and listen. As you repeat the words, you're kind of reprogramming those words into the body that everything is going to be okay. So, but it's a kind of a repetitive process where you'd have to do it. You don't just do it once and then, everything is going to shift. It's something that you'd have to continuously do over and over, but it does work in the moment if you're feeling, let's say, a little bit stressed or if you're experiencing anxiety for whatever reason. So if you feel that anxiety coming on, just even if you don't say anything, just tapping. And you tap around your face, around your eyes, on your forehead, the top of your head, and your hand. That alone will help your body to just kind of calm down because it's going to signal the body that you are safe, you're okay. So that's what that is. The other question that you had, so how did I come into hypnotherapy? And that came about through my healing process. So as I was trying to find ways to heal, and it all started because of my husband and his depression. He refused all types of help that I tried to offer. He wouldn't go to any psychiatrist, psychologist, or anything that I tried to get him to help him with his severe anxiety and depression. He didn't believe in medication. And he used to threaten me, you get me medication, I'll just flush them down the toilet. And I said, well, I have to find ways to help them because we just can't live this way. So I started investigating, and I already had started coming across with Dolores Cannon's work, and I was fascinated by what she was doing. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dolores Cannon.
Mm-mm.
She came up with the QHHT, which is a form of hypnosis, and they do a lot of past life regressions with her technique. But I was just
Okay. Yeah.
fascinated by her work. And there were others that I was kind of following, and I was just fascinated by all the things. And I decided to let me try that. And I started trying that for myself. And I ended up healing from my childhood trauma and depression. within a very short period of time. And I'm like, oh my God, this thing does work. Along with other things that I was doing in between, but they're all holistic. And then I said, well, if this works for me, it's going to work for my husband. It certainly did. I was able to get him to a place where he went back to work. He was out of work for 8 years, mostly because of his depression. He just couldn't function. He couldn't leave the house. I was able to get him to a place where he was functionable and able to, function outside and be able to hold a job. And then I decided to, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to help people. Um, you know, I knew these tools worked because they worked for me. And I said, there's so many people out there that are just kind of stuck with they just haven't been able to heal. And I knew that was my calling. That's what I wanted to do was, help people in a very natural way. And I know it works. I've seen it over and over again. And that's how I came about.
Was your community supportive of that, like open to the fact that you were embracing this non-traditional world and stepping into that path?
I'd say yes. I didn't have any, my family was supportive. And I think they were supportive because I was always kind of the odd child in a way. I think my whole life, people kind of gravitated to me for help. So I don't think they expected anything different. Maybe the modality was something that they weren't familiar with, but they're like, okay, whatever. You know, they just kind of,
They're like, this makes sense.
yeah, that kind of makes sense for her that she would be doing something like this. Not that I don't think they understand what I do. They know it kind of works. They're kind of okay, whatever. If it works, and you're happy, we're fine. But I think my mom has been the biggest supporter and the biggest believer in me. Like she really, I've been able to help her so as well with those tools, and she's just been one of the greatest supporter in my life.
It sounds like she's also intuitive herself. I
Yes.
mean, the fact that she came to your home and is like, there's something over your house. Like, it sounds like she is much more open to her own gifts and sensitivities. Like, she just trusts it.
Yes, but it's funny. She's very, very religious. So I didn't think she would be as open because I kind of had to, I kind of stepped away from religion, um,
Hmm.
through my healing process. And I have to say that my healing process and this whole journey that I took was really because of my firstborn child. She's a teenager, almost 15 years old, but she kind of triggered me into this path of, and I can share some of the experiences because there may be parents out there that may be going through the same thing. My background was I was brought up in a very religious household, or at least with my mother. My dad, not so much. But, my mother was very religious. She was very, very attached to the church. And
Hmm.
so when my daughter was born, there were a lot of things that were unexplained, or I couldn't explain what she was experiencing. And it was very frustrating because I spent a few years just going from one doctor to another doctor, trying to figure out what is wrong with my child, and I couldn't get answers. I couldn't get a straight answer. And it wasn't until she was able to express herself and really explain what she was experiencing that I started putting the pieces together. And I'm like, okay, now I understand. And at that time, because my mother was so religious, kind of pushed, like, you have to get, her baptized, you have to put her, in school, at the church, and so forth. And I just went along with it because that's what I grew up with. But there were things that were just unexplainable. And I'm like, I'm not so sure. And there was one time that, and to kind of explain what some of the things she was experiencing was, she would have these random tantrums. So I would go to a store and out of nowhere, she would have like this huge tantrum. I would have to leave the store and I would be embarrassed. And I would get to the car and then she would be just fine. Like nothing happened.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I'll look at her, I'm like, what happened? Like, you just went crazy in the store and now you're just like back to normal. And at one point, because of my religious beliefs, I thought, oh my God, does this get possessed? Is there, you know, you start thinking, oh, maybe somebody put a curse on her. These are the things that you grow up with, and this is what you know, so this is what you're going to start thinking, right? The evil eye or whatever. So I'm like, oh, maybe I should get her baptized. She'll stop all
That would
this.
have been my grandma. She would have been like, someone put the ojo on her.
Yes, exactly. Like she would have these random, she'd go crazy. And there were times where she would start, just banging against the wall. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why are you behaving this way? Like, I couldn't explain her behavior. And so I had a lot of questions. I'm like, I thought, from a religious point of view, I was having all these things. I'm like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I would have the church come in and, have the community come in and do prayers at my house. And I thought, maybe that will help. Nothing was helping until, I want to say maybe she was 6 years old or so. So she was already in elementary school. There was a day she's getting dressed in her room. I'm in the kitchen just getting everything ready for us to leave out the door in the morning. And she's literally like yelling, like, stop, stop. I walk in her room like, what's going on? Why are you yelling? Why are you saying stop? She goes, there's this guy in my head and he doesn't stop talking. And I
Oh,
froze. I was literally shaking, freaking out on the inside and trying not to react. I'm like,
yeah.
stay calm. But in my head, I'm going, oh my gosh, she sees ghosts. She sees ghosts. And like, what am I going to do? Like, who's she talking? Like, I was freaking out because I didn't know what to do. And my worst nightmare was, what if she sees ghosts? What if these entities are attacking her or bothering her? Like, I don't know what to do. How do I help her? And she's like clearly very upset. So, I'm like, calm down, like pretend this is normal. And, so I calmed down and I told her, I'm like, well, let's find out what he wants. let's get, let's get more information. And I was trying to play it out and trying to calm her
You
down.
were so much more braver than I am, because I would have been calling my grandma and then there would have been a prayer circle and off to the church.
That would have been faced with, all these questions.
Yes,
and
exactly.
an exorcism, something going on. But,
Something. It would have been big.
But, I was very calm because I had gone through so much with her and she was constantly sick and I had all these experiences that I couldn't explain, doctors couldn't explain. So I wanted to really figure it out. So I decided I'm going to be calm. I'm going to pretend this is totally normal. I'm going to try to figure this out with her. So I was able to calm her down. And I said, let's figure it out. Like, this is normal. I kind of, try to get her to just engage and not be so upset. So in the following days, I started coaching her. I'm like, let's try to find out who this person is. Do they have a name? Is it the same person that's bothering you or so forth? And I was able to get enough information out of her because, again, she was a child. She clearly did not want to be bothered. And then it just explained all her behavior. She was such a busybody that I guess, that soul that was trying to communicate with her might have been there for a while and she just didn't want to be bothered, that she kept herself very busy. So she was a busybody. Her mind was always going. She wouldn't stop from morning to night. She was like all over the place. You couldn't calm her down. And we're able to find out that it was her spirit guide.
Oh.
And that brought like such a relief to me that I was like, thank God she doesn't see ghosts.
Now, how did you determine it was her spirit guide?
So by coaching her to ask the right questions. So I was able to calm her down enough where she was comfortable with this person coming to her. And then I said, okay, next time that he shows up, ask these questions. Let's find out. Let's get more information. And she was able to relate a lot of the information. Half the time she would forget because he would show up at different times. And it could have been in the morning when she was getting ready, or it could have been at school. And that was very frustrating. So he would show up the time she was more focused. So, like, if she was getting dressed, she wasn't busy. And that was the time, like,
She
her
would slow
mind was
down.
quiet because she was just, like, relaxed, just getting dressed. Or if she was at school taking a test, she would be relaxed and concentrated. He would show up. And then she would get in trouble by the teachers because, the teachers
She's
would call
talking.
me like, your daughter's just, looking into space. She's not paying attention and this and that. So that was like another thing that we had to deal with. But I was able to at least coach her through. I said, don't worry about the teachers. They just don't understand. They don't see what you see. This is more important than the test. Like, you could finish the test later. But, there were times that it was very difficult where the friction was really bad between her and the teachers because I couldn't explain to them what was happening because they wouldn't have understood. And she couldn't explain it to them, right? And I had already warned her, don't tell them, what you
don't talk about
experienced,
that.
because they don't experience what you experience. They don't see what you see, just like I don't. And this, you're very special. And if you say you're, experiencing this, it's going to get worse. The way they're reacting towards you will be much worse. So she already knew not to say, oh, I have this person talking to me, that's why I'm distracted. She would get very defensive with the teacher and, it would cause, other issues, but we were able to work through them. Most of the time, she would have good teachers. It was like the ones that weren't where she didn't connect as well, that were more of an issue, but we got through it. So it was through her experience really that really set me off on the whole spiritual journey and really studying energies and all these things, and got me through, the whole roller coaster of hypnotherapy and all these other tools that I came to learn along the way. And with that, I ended up pulling her out of church because there was a time she was like questioning things. And I'm like, you know what? Your teacher is only teaching things from her perspective of what she learned. She hasn't experienced the things you're experiencing. So maybe we should just kind of not go there anymore before we start having friction in the church as well. So we stopped going altogether, to kind of just protect her, really. I didn't want her to be exposed to being overridden with information versus the information she was receiving. So I really wanted her to keep the information she was receiving as the truth versus somebody else telling her, oh no, this is my truth. This is the truth that that you have to learn.
Yeah. Now, has she learned to set boundaries with her spirit guide so it knows not to bother her during a test and stuff like that?
We tried. it was difficult because, again, she was such a busybody that he specifically told her, he's like, this is the only time I can connect with you because you're so busy. So I have to come in when your mind's quiet. So he had to pick those times. So instead, because, children, you can't tell them, okay, be quiet at this time. That's not going to happen.
This is spirit guide time.
Yes. No. With adults is a different story. We can set rules and we can have certain times, but with children, you can't, you have to kind of work around their own timing and work with them. But, there were times which she would come home and say, he warned me there was a bad guy, a couple of miles away, to be careful, where, he would keep her safe. And we'd come to find out there was, some person in the neighborhood, that the cops were looking for or whatever. So there were times where, she learned to like pay attention. That when he did come in, because it could have been, just to warn her about something or tell her about something that was going to happen. So we never set like parameters because I knew that wasn't going to work.
Have you found, or have you in your journey connected to your own spirit guide team?
I want to say yes, but not in the sense like my daughter. I think we are all connected to our spirit guides. We're just not aware of. And with me, it just like, I think most of us, it's just that little inner voice that's so soft. It's almost like that first thought that you have that you always dismiss because there's always that second thought that overrides that first thought. And I've learned to pay more attention to that soft voice that comes in, that little, it's almost like a thought that comes in into your space that kind of tells you, oh, turn left. And you're like, oh no, I always turn right, so I'm going to turn right. And you automatically override that first voice but we all experience that. So I just learned to, over the years, pay more attention to that voice.
That makes sense.
And that's probably the only experience I haven't. It's not like I think only once in my life did I have a voice come in that was very clear, like a human voice, to say something that was very important to me, and that only happened once. But other than that, it's always been that soft voice, and we all have it. We just are not in tune to it. But if we all could learn how to be in tune to it and be guided by that voice. And if we do, that voice is always there to either keep us safe or guide us in the right direction. What we tend to do as humans is automatically override it. If you go to the grocery store and you always take that same road to get to the grocery store, and then one day you have a thought, oh, why don't you take that second route? It's not the route that you usually take, but you have that thought, maybe you should take that route. But what we do automatically is like, no, I always go this way, so I'm going this way. And then you find out there's an accident. So now you're stuck in traffic. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I should have taken that turn and gone the other way, because that was my first thought. That's what that is. And it's about us learning to really tune into that voice and let us guide us, even if it doesn't make sense. Because a lot of times, the guidance that comes in doesn't make sense to us. And we have to learn to trust it. And the more we practice that and we experience it, the more we're able to have a wider connection with our guides. But we all have that connection. We just not in tune to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of see it as muscle memory. The more you use that intuitive muscle, the stronger it gets. The more you listen to it, the louder it gets. And I completely agree. Part of what you said kind of resonates with me in a different way that I haven't thought of before. But I wonder if when we connect with our spirit team, our spirit guides, or whatever people want to call them, um, it is potentially presented or manifests in the way that we are connected with like the clair senses. So for your daughter, perhaps, she can hear them, or the one fellow who is her stronger spirit guide, perhaps she's got some kind of like clairaudience that she can do, where she can hear those things. Whereas with you, you're more of a feeler. So you feel your spirit guide team. And, we hear about people that can see their spirit guide team. And so for me, I wonder if it's very closely tied to those senses, is how we are able to connect with our team.
So, based on the experiences and with working with mediums as well, I have close friends who are mediums, and even from my mother's experiences and studying my daughter and her experiences versus my experience, which is not as gifted, in a way, the way we see it, but we are all connected to our spirit guides. Like I explained before, it's just a matter of us not really paying attention to that voice. However, some of us come in already with a wider connection than others. So that might be like your gift. So we all come in with different gifts from birth, or we may develop our gifts through time. So there may be like milestones in our life that we have to achieve before those gifts are kind of presented to us. So everybody has a different journey, but that doesn't mean we cannot experience all of those. It's just a matter of, I guess, what our soul contract has decided to do before we came in. So with her, she, whatever her gift is, that it's changing as she grows, and she becomes an adult. That gift may expand into something totally different. That's something that she came in with. So that's part of her soul contract, that she was going to come in with that. With my mom, I know she didn't have those gifts when she was younger. So those were developed over the years. Now she was very connected with the church, and she's um, really big on prayer. So she's been praying over the years. So her gifts started developing and opening up in, later on in her life, in her adulthood. So she didn't have that. Even though she had the connection, they really didn't open up until she, I guess, met certain milestones through her life. And that explanation, I believe, also meets where we have um, mediums. Some of them can see, and they're all different, right? They experience that connection very differently with spirit, where some of them can hear or see. So I think it's the same. Either they were born with it, naturally they have that openness, and some of them, as we can, I'm sure you've spoken to them or interviewed some, they develop that gift throughout their life, or at some point in their life it comes about. So I really think that, one, even though we all have the potential to experience that, it is within, because we're all one, at a higher soul level, we're all one. We all have the same powers. We're no different from one another. It's the experience that we're having here, based on what we decided to experience. Those gifts may be given at different, or develop or shown to us at different stages based on what we agreed to do.
Yeah, and I definitely believe that our gifts, as long as we're open to it, our gifts evolve and change and manifest as they need to and as we need them. So, someone may be feeling their whole life, but then in a moment see and hear. And like, I really do think that oftentimes, as long as we're open to it, they do manifest as we need them in that moment in time. Because just like we're not stagnant and we grow and evolve. I believe that our gifts do too, which can be frustrating
Yes.
when your whole life you think I'm a feeler, and then suddenly you start seeing and it's like, wait a minute. That's not where I was.
Absolutely. And, you know, like for me, I don't know if I'll ever see because I have this fear of I don't want to see ghosts. Like that will just freak me out. And
Yeah, I'm with you. I
so,
don't want to see.
you know, maybe that's why I'm more of I feel the energy. I can sense, you know, the density of different energies. I could feel if somebody is coming in with a very dense energy feel or more positive and joyful. I'm more of a feeler. So we also have a choice of what we want to experience. You know, we may choose, you know what, I don't want to experience this. And you may deny that as well. So you have the free will to choose what you want to experience. But, you know, you also have to take into consideration whatever your soul chose to experience in this life, you know, that might be part of your contract. That at some point, you know, that may be part of the things that you have to experience and kind of give in. If that's something that I am supposed to experience at some point in my life, I'm going to have to come to terms to that and say, okay, I'm ready. But I don't think until I'm ready I will ever experience that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the soul contract thing, that really, I've been thinking about that today. I was talking about it earlier, actually, to
I
a
was
friend
like,
of mine.
just today, like
No, but
automatically
earlier
just
today it came
frustrated.
up because I was, my thought process was, oh man, some things are just so exasperating. They can be so draining and overwhelming. And it's like, it's probably part of the soul contract. But at some point, it's like, man, can I get a soul lawyer? Can we like amend the contract? Because it's not working for me right
I think
Right.
we
now.
Just
all
rewrite a couple
question it.
things.
This is the conclusion that I've come to. The conclusion I've come to is this. We as a soul decided, okay, this is what I want to experience. Maybe I want to pick this family that's, you know, a little difficult. You know, I know when I go in there, I might not experience the best life. You know, I know they're a little screwed up, whatever. They're going to help me learn whatever lesson I need to learn. What happens is you come in, you kind of know the circumstances. You know that once you roll the dice, anything could happen. So now you're here. You have these milestones that you're like, okay, this is what I want to experience. I picked this family. Then you come here, and because it's a duality type of a planet where you experience good and you experience bad, there's positive energy and there's negative energy. They have free will. You know, there's free range we have free will of what side to pick of, you know, do I want to focus more on positive or negative energy? The one thing we do not have control over or is our environment and the people around us and what they're choosing. That is not in your contract. That's kind of like, hey, we're just going to roll the dice and see what happens with those aspects. And you can't control those. Like, that's not predestined, a lot of the things. So we end up experiencing, I believe, a lot more pain and a lot more painful experiences because the other players are kind of being drawn in to picking the more negative side of things. And that's not necessarily part of that contract. Like, that wasn't really planned. You did plan to come in and experience that family. Were you planning on getting beat up every day and, you know, being abused emotionally? Probably not. Maybe to a certain extent you expected that because you already picked that family. You knew the environment that was going to probably create based on that family line. But the day to day experiences, I believe it's kind of, you know, up in the air and let's see what happens. You know, at any moment it could have shifted in any direction. Now, the specific things that you pick to experience, they have to happen. But everything else in between is really kind of part of the game.
Yeah. Those are the things we can navigate.
Yes, and remember, you can only control your experience. You cannot control the experiences of others. So you may be in an environment where you choose to be positive, and let's say, I don't want to be in this negative space. I'm going to work on myself. But that doesn't mean that your spouse, your brother, sister, mother, and dad are choosing the same path. So if they choose to go in a more negative path, that you have no control over, that's their own journey.
And I feel like that right there is the hardest thing that I think people have a hard
Yes.
time with, is that the idea of letting go. And letting go doesn't mean like giving up on. So anybody that's dealt with family that have volatile, personalities, or addiction or depression or anything like that, especially addiction, you see that a lot these days. It's the idea that you can let go of the responsibility. It is not my responsibility to control your behavior. It is not my responsibility to make those choices for you. You can let go of that personal responsibility and control without letting go of that person.
Yes.
So saying that, like, I love you, I'm here for you, I'm rooting for you, but I have to let go of the expectation that I can fix you.
Absolutely. And, sometimes I do get clients where they come in, they're like, I need to fix my wife or my husband. And I say, I'm like, that's all great, but you really can't. Like, you can't force somebody, to change. Like, you have to first work on yourself. So if you're in an abusive situation where, okay, my partner or whatever is a drug addict or an alcoholic, and the first tendency as humans is, I need to fix this person, then my life will be right. Like, I'm miserable. I don't like myself. I don't like the way I'm living. I don't like my life. You have all these negative things going on. And your belief is, if only this person would change, if only they would change their habits, then my life would be perfect. It would fix how I feel. But the reality is, you have to fix you first. You have to change how you feel first. And then your reality will change. Because once you heal yourself first and you heal that trauma, those emotions that you're experiencing, you're going to experience two things. One, you're going to realize, hey, I have to get the hell out of here. This is not for me, right? I'm not going to put up with
Yes,
this. I'm not going to put up with
this is not healthy.
it's not healthy. I'm not going to put up with the alcoholic or the drug addict and their abuse. And I'm not going to put up with how that makes me feel. And I'm going to withdraw myself from the situation. And by doing so, I could possibly help them. The other option is, you become strong enough and stable enough where you say, I choose to stay in this situation, but now I'm in a position where I'm emotionally stable, that I could offer that help, that I could take that journey to help this person to get where they need to be, if that makes sense. Because if you're
Mhm.
emotionally broken, you cannot help another emotionally broken person. You're both going to drown.
Well, it's kind of like you were saying at the beginning too, was the idea that if you're in a negative space, it's going to draw in those negative things. So if you're both in a negative space, you might be feeding each other,
Oh, yes,
like feeding off of
absolutely.
each other and just making it, magnifying that intensity of whatever you're both going through.
Absolutely. And you end up, feeding off each other's energy. So the partner will drink or, whatever. It will trigger you. You're going to, you either it's going to be chaos where you start arguing, there's anger involved, you get depressed, self blame, all the stuff. Is there any positive in there? No. It's a roller coaster ride. It's like you're just spinning the wheel over and over. It's the same experience over. Nothing will ever change. Through the experiences, because I, had the childhood trauma, I saw my dad, verbally, emotionally, physically abuse my mom over and over again. And this is a lot from like an outsider looking into any type of abusive situations. Like, well, why can't that person just leave the situation? They can't, because they cannot see past their own pain, and they've become so accustomed to it. That's how they see as perhaps love. They might have over the years come into understanding this is the only way I can receive love. It's through this type of relationship, but you always end up finding out that always comes back from childhood trauma, where they never had the experience of a healthy relationship, even as children. Therefore, as adults, now they're in these situations, all they're doing is repeating the cycle
Yeah.
of that abuse over and over again. And they keep attracting that over and over again into their life. And the only way you can stop that cycle, again, is when you start going through your healing journey and start realizing, oh my God, the more, I go back to those instances where, my dad, this is how he treated my mom. And I'm just kind of so traumatized by that. I was led to believe that's how you receive love. That was the only way that, if I'm treated this way, that must mean I'm lovable. But if I, treated differently, I don't recognize that. So that's foreign. So you keep, kind of attracting that same type of relationship over and over again. And this is why it's important. You have to start healing yourself, recognizing who you really are. And then you're able to clearly see, oh my goodness, this is not what I want in my life. I never wanted this, but I didn't know. I thought this was love. I thought this is what a relationship was supposed to be. I thought this is how I can receive, what I wanted, like acceptance, acknowledgement. The only way I could be acknowledged that I exist is if I have this person come in and yell at me. Then I know, I'm worthy of something. I'm worthy of an argument or whatever that belief system. And some of them are like crazy. That's how crazy our minds work, is we create these incredible belief systems that really sometimes make no sense, but it made sense to us at the time when we created them. And they just keep us trapped in those cycles.
I think depending on the person too, it's playing out different endings. So if you did grow up with someone who is abusive and you find a similar partner who also gives you love, you're kind of creating that second part of the story. So this person didn't give me love from my past that was abusive, but this one does. So it's creating that alternate storyline almost, or that additional ending. I guess if that makes sense.
No, you're absolutely right.
Now, for people that want to listen to your podcast and work with you or potentially contact you, where can people find more information about you?
They can go right into my website, and that's martppractice.com, or they can go right into the social media. They can reach me that way. I'm on Instagram, and it's under Coach M. Grace. They could find me there. They could find me on YouTube under Marisa Grace.
Did you have any final thoughts for us before we wrap up this evening?
Yes. So whenever you find yourself in any situation in the topics that we just spoke about, is the trick is really to shift the frequencies that you're in, and just pay attention to your emotions. So if you feel that you're experiencing something that doesn't feel right, that's negative or heavy, start paying close attention to the emotions that you're experiencing and work on shifting those. Use whatever tools that you can to help you shift.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us this evening. I appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Time went by so quickly, but I
Yes.
appreciate you making space to come have a conversation with us tonight. John, you want to add anything?
No, I just appreciate you coming on, like Ashley said, and then listening to your stories. And hopefully, like you said earlier before we started recording, this will reach whoever it needs to reach. So,
Firmly believe it will.
oh, yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
It always does.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You're very
Of
welcome.
course.
All
All right, John
right.
Thomas, you want to bring us home?
Yes. Thank you again, Marissa, for coming on. And thank you to all of our listeners for listening to this episode of 300 Podcast with your hosts. I'm John Thomas.
I am Ashley Lunar Goddess.
And if you have any questions, comments, or episode suggestions, please feel free to email us at 300podcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't done so already, please like and follow our social media. You don't want to miss amazing moments like tonight.
Until next time. Are you looking for more awesome podcasts? Head on over to withoutyourhead.com for access to the Without Your Head podcast network, where you'll find a variety of podcasts sure to keep you entertained and coming back for more.